Hello and welcome back to another episode of Red Tinted Glasses. And if you're tuning in, you're already probably doing well to stick with us as we reflect on this episode as the Dons were humbled at Hampden, a 6-0 damaging defeat in the semi-final, ending our League Cup hopes. Let's just hope we get things back on track this weekend, as we'll also be previewing the visit of Dundee to Pittodrie in Saturday night football. And I'm joined on this episode, as always, by Phil Mayer and Callum coming back on the episode after a couple of weeks off. Probably good to have a few of us on because there's a lot to digest after the weekend. But Callum, we're not going to sit and dwell too much on the weekend because one, nobody wants to hear it. And I think a lot of the fan base are not maybe as downbeat as we would expect after a 6-0 humiliation in Hampden.
No, I mean I'm certainly not, and I think the reaction on social media from what I saw was a lot better than maybe what I expected. But it's kind of stemmed from Jimmy's "stick with us" sort of motto, and also the fact he does have so much in the bank with such a good start to the league season. It sort of felt like Celtic can do that to teams, and we really made a buckies of it ourselves, but it's all about bouncing back, and we've got a chance to go into the next international break still just behind on goal difference. So it's very important that we bounce back and don't dwell on it all that much. So we will dwell on it slightly in this episode, but not all that much.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of going to maybe more focus on the learnings that we can take from the weekend. And I'm sure Jimmy Talene will be taking plenty from the weekend, because if we sit here and analyse every goal that we conceded, we'll probably have listeners tuning or dropping off, much like the fans dropped off at Hampden. And I know both me and yourself, Callum, left during the game. But look, every fan is entitled to do what they want when they've paid their money to go to the game. I think, sitting watching us get passed off the park was really not enjoyable for large parts. And I think also, on the other hand, kudos to everyone that did stay till the bitter end. I would say kudos to you, Phil, but you only stayed because you didn't know where the bus was and due to your inebriation. But Phil, on your point, the Dons started with the same starting lineup for the third successive game. We spoke on the last episode about tiredness potentially affecting us going into the game. Celtic had the opportunity to rest players against Dundee in midweek. Were you confident on seeing that starting lineup that we could impose ourselves, obviously, after the last time out, that 2-2 draw at Parkhead as well?
I wouldn't say I was confident, but I also wouldn't say that I was filled with fear, if that makes any sense. I think in terms of the mentality needed for the fixture, it was probably the best we could have went for. But at the same time, I think the fact that we had spoken so much about, there were probably several players that could have maybe done with a little rest of the legs, with the sort of style that Celtic play and with the level of rotation they got at the weekend, did kind of fill me with a little bit of dread of this could be quite a long afternoon, maybe not a 6-0 long afternoon, but definitely an afternoon of being up against it.
Yeah, and good to see that, Jimmy Talene said he's going to take learning curves from the weekend. You've taken learning curves from the feedback and invested in a mic, so hopefully everyone's hearing you loud and clear. And Callum, with the Dons going for the kind of same starting lineup, I thought during that first half, I think Celtic exploited that very well. They kept possession, moved the ball. Listening to Brendan Rodgers post-match speak about, dragging Aberdeen from side to side, allowing them to then, use the men inside, the inside runners. We looked so jaded after half an hour. I thought, obviously, it didn't help being a couple of goals down and then very quickly 3, but it very quickly felt like it was going to be a long evening.
Yeah, it certainly did. It was made even longer by the visibility issues sort of as well.
What did you think of that, actually?
I just wonder how they got that many fucking pyrotechnics in the ground. Absolutely loads. There must have been at least probably 50 involved in the opening sort of display that they went with, and then there seemed to be about 3, 4, 5 after every goal as well. How the hell did they manage that? That's my main thing.
I mean, we've played a semi-final without the use of VAR before, and we saw how that went. So I don't know why we had to wait 15 minutes for it to suddenly the smoke clear. And it wasn't like there was any wind to help that.
Yeah, the weather really didn't help. We should have maybe all just did an announcement over the tannoy, sort of an Abdi blow for 10 seconds as hard as they can and see how that goes. But ironically, it did look like we were huffing and puffing the Aberdeen side after that half an hour. Celtic moved the ball around really, really well, and we struggled. And then when we got the ball, I thought throughout the game and in the goals as well, a lot of the issues came from us not being able to keep a hold of the ball, whether that's people running sort of into dead ends or just really slack, sloppy passes that looked very tired, and it's annoying because Celtic can turn up and do that to a team, and we really did not deal with it at all. But I was going to say credit to them, absolutely not. It's very, very frustrating, but we really struggled to deal with how quickly and how sharply they were moving the ball around, and it seemed to take it out of us very, very quickly.
And I think you're absolutely right, though. They can do that to any team, and that is any team domestically. I know there's maybe fans of one certain Glasgow team thinking they can't, but we've already seen plenty of times recently that they can do it to you as well. Phil, listening to Willie Miller and Pi Bonner on the radio on the way home, they kind of spoke a little bit about maybe the naivety of Jimmy Talleen and setting up in, I don't know, I wouldn't really call it an aggressive manner because it's the usual formation that we go with. But again, we spoke about Hampden, bigger pitch, going with the two wingers. Do you think there was any naivety there? Because we spoke about kind of flooding the midfield and putting Palaversa in there as well. I think I'm not sure if it's naivety. I think he was maybe a little bit let down by Topi and Duke's lack of defensive cover, and obviously we saw both of them hold off at half time.
Yeah, I don't think it was naivety. I think, we knew Jimmy was going to play his style of football. I think we all wanted Jimmy to play his style of football because, I mean, how often have we seen us just go and damage the limitation off the bat? And, if we had gone and sat in and lost 3-0, I don't think it would have been, but it might have even been a worse reaction to what we got at losing it 6-0. So, yeah, but I think, like you say, I think the wingers did let him down a little bit in terms of it's a wide pitch, it's a big pitch. Mackenzie and Devlin were going to need all the support they could against, well, without a doubt, the two best wingers in the league, really, in Kuhn and Maeda. So I think that was unfortunate. But yeah, I think as well, it was just, we could have done with an extra body in the middle. And I don't think that's a fault of Jimmy. I think hindsight's 2020. I know he's not using tiredness as an excuse, but it's definitely a factor. We just looked overrun and just really just slack, in our own play. We couldn't really keep a hold of the ball either. So even if we could get ourselves forward and utilise Duke and Tope in an attacking sense, we just couldn't string two passes together to even get to that point. So I don't think it was naivety. I think it was just Celtic were on their game and we really weren't, and that's just a fact. It doesn't matter who it was that was on that pitch, whether it was us or anyone else. I think the outcome would have been the exact same.
Yeah, and I think, you again, as you say, you can look at it both ways. It is refreshing to have a manager that's, from out with Scotland, as has been discussed plenty of time, that has that fresh perspective and not being scared to sit in and park the bus against Celtic and Rangers. He's here to have a go and, take the game to Celtic and Rangers. We've seen it already this season, but a learning curve, no doubt, and I'm sure he's going to take that as we progress in the season, because I think if we then revert back to the league this weekend coming up, we've got a huge game at Pittodrie, another sellout against Dundee, and it feels really important to get ourselves back on track ahead of what is a potentially huge 3 games. Obviously, all those games being away from home before Celtic then come to Pittodrie in December, and I guess we'll speak more about them after this weekend as well. Obviously, that result of the weekend, if we reset, get the 3 points, things are maybe back being rosy again. But as I said, we don't want to dwell too much on the game itself, but there's a couple of points that I'm going to come to you both on. I'll come to you first, Phil, given you're off mute at the moment. And it's a gripe of yours that has been mentioned on this podcast before, relating to the first goal, zonal marking. Again, speaking about Jimmy Talleen and learnings, will he maybe learn that certain games we need to ditch zonal marking? Because I thought actually at the game it was potentially a foul from Carter Vickers. He seemed to be all over Jack McKenzie, as you both have told me, having endured the highlights before we recorded this episode tonight. But we were standing like statues, and Cameron Carter Vickers rose highest to give Celtic the lead.
Yeah. Again, I don't know how many times I've mentioned it this season already. Hate zonal marking with a burning passion. I think I always will. Much like the inverted fullbacks of the Pep Guardiola era, zonal marking can also get in the bin. Just mark a man. It just it gives accountability and limits a lot of issues as well. I think looking at it back, it's frustrating that you've got Carter Vickers, who's built like an absolute steam train, with nobody goal side of him. I think McKenzie's standing in front of him. Malloy's kind of not on the post, but on the post, just kind of in this weird space between Meatov and the 6 yard line. Carter Vickers rises up. I think his hands are on McKenzie, but like me and Callum said just before we came on, doesn't really make an attempt to really get up and try and challenge Carter Vickers anyway. So I don't think we can really use it as too much of an excuse. But yeah, just frustrating that a player like that doesn't have somebody on him like Ruby to just follow him around, because that's where the ball's going to go in 9 times out of 10. Same thing as we often do at corners, where we're looking for the likes of Rubizic to be on the end of it.
Yeah, and Callum, you mentioned that point as well, about maybe not adopting zonal marking and having Rubizic on certainly our best header, and Slobodan Rubizic mark their best header of the ball in Cameron Carter Vickers. Do you think we could have maybe still adapted zonal marking, but have the players watch where the Celtic defenders are coming? But unfortunately, I guess it means if they start making runs, we're lost and all over the place.
Yeah, I think that's the problem. I think that's probably why a lot of managers do use zonal marking, to avoid that sort of thing. In terms of everyone's got their area and they should know how to deal with it. Celtic played into the area where we did not know how to deal with it, and I initially thought Mitov perhaps could have came and commanded his 6 yard box. However, Daisa Maeda was doing what he does best most of the time and was being a menace, and was literally parked right in front of him. So then you're risking maybe he fouls, Mitov fouls Maeda. But I'm in total agreement with Phil in terms of Rubizic should. I just think even if you are going zonal, mark their fucking best header of the ball. And when it's someone as good as Carter Vickers, who seems to not really have a flaw in his game as well, stick Slobodan Rubizic on him. He would defend the borders with his head if he could. I don't know what borders I'm talking about, but some of them, and head everything away. Park him on Carter Vickers, and that goal likely doesn't happen. Or at least even if he doesn't win the ball, he makes it more difficult for Carter Vickers, because he's got a 6'3" Balkan to deal with. It's I don't like it either. Zonal marking, Ben, for me.
Yeah, and I think as well what also didn't help Ruby in that first half was the soft yellow card he seemed to pick up. Obviously, we spoke about that, Phil, with Nilsson and him picking up. But Callum, we spoke about in terms of keeping the ball, and obviously Celtic's ability to, passes, in my opinion, passes off the park for large periods in that first half. I remember a couple of guys behind me arguing over the fact that we were passing the ball around our defence quite a lot, and folk just wanting us to hoof it up. But the argument being like, we're getting a rest by just keeping the possession. Unfortunately, we weren't doing anything. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, the slack passes, Nielsen again culpable of another slack pass in a forward area. And it just seemed to take 2 or 3 passes for Celtic to cut us right open. I don't really know what Mitov's doing either, coming out for that and then stopping and then going back. And we discussed just come out and commit. Would it have been a red card for denying a clear goal scoring opportunity? I'll get that out eventually. Just frustrating, that one, wasn't it?
It was sort of a catalogue of errors. I mean, Nilsson's pass is too short, and Ruby sort of standing, waiting, and I think in the end, his mind, he's on that yellow card, doesn't want to commit too much in case it's a red card, and then ultimately things would have been even worse for us. And then, Mitov does not come out and sort of commit to it. Then it gets even worse. by nobody covering the centre of the goal when Kyogo's waiting to pick his spot, and he just blasted it straight down the middle. And ultimately it hit off the bar and went in, so perhaps nobody would be able to do anything about it anyway. But nobody covering the centre of the goal, perfect, just ideal. And it's sort of, I think that goal maybe have all sort of summed things up for us throughout the game. Just so slack, so sloppy, some poor decisions, and ultimately costly. And it wasn't the only time that we're giving the ball cheap play away. There was another one certainly from Nilsson, I remember, where he just didn't look before he passed the ball, and it just goes straight to a Celtic player. But it feels like I'm sort of highlighting him only. It wasn't just him. It was a total off day for us, unfortunately. And yeah, Celtic are good enough to punish us, and it sort of felt like that was how I expected the game at Parkhead to go. When you lose goals in such quick succession, you just expect them just to not stop. And unfortunately, they didn't this weekend.
But I don't think it is singling out Nilsson, like you say. I think it's something we've spoken about a lot recently, in the fact of, again, we're not using the tiredness as an excuse, but the game against Dundee United, slack passes, just he looks like a man that has played a season in Norway and is now on course to play a full season in Scotland, and it's starting to show a little bit. Whether it's mental tiredness or actual physical fatigue, there has been a few instances where his game has dropped off a little bit. And I think it is because his standards have been so high for the most part. But no, I don't think it's singling him out. I think it is just comes back to that further point of the team just looking a little bit drained.
Yeah, I think it was only 10 games I think he played in Norway, I think. But I think you're right, Callum. I think the manners of the goals that we conceded on Saturday, I totally agree, was the manners of goals I would have expected at Parkhead. And I think what hurt me most was just how easy it felt for Celtic to score at the weekend. I don't really feel they had to work particularly hard for any of the 6 goals. They had 5 shots on target and had scored 5 goals. And as you said before we started recording, if Mitov had brought Maeda down, would he have been sent off for denying a clear goal scoring opportunity? Every time they came forward, felt like a clear goal scoring opportunity at times, especially in that first half. But I guess, as we've said, it's refreshing to see us trying to take the game to Celtic. Just unfortunately, Celtic were at their very best this weekend, and it wasn't to be for us. In terms of the second half, as I said, both me and Callum left 4-5-0 respectively. Phil, in terms of the second half, do you think once it got to that kind of heavy score line, 4, we should have been maybe having one eye on Dundee, and because at that point the game's probably not kind of winnable anymore?
Yeah, I think it should have been sort of wholesale changes. I know what Jimmy was trying to do. It was, didn't want to kind of show as if he was bowing out and giving up. But I don't think anyone would have seen it as bowing out and giving up. We were creating nothing. I think no matter what we did, even with the changes we brought on, we were going to really create anything. I think Celtic at that point were completely in their flow. Everything was clicking for them. Everything was coming off for them. Even for Kuhn's goal later on, the ball deflects off Kyogo and where was it, Kuhn's goal or Maeda's goal deflects perfectly off Kyogo back to Kuhn to play it into Maeda. So it's sort of like there's not really much you can do when everything's kind of just going against you. I think we've potentially had a lot more of the rub of the green than we had last season. And again, this was just one of those off days. So no, I think I would have liked to have seen, like Florrie mentioned, potentially Nielsen, McGrath, even Devlin, maybe just getting those ice packs on the calves and getting ready to go for Pittodrie on Saturday.
I suppose conversely then, Callum, if we do ring the changes, as Phil says, it maybe looks like we're bowing out or giving up the ghost, which isn't very fair to any of the fans that stayed to the bitter end, or just any fan that travelled down. But also maybe not fair to some of the fringe players. You could have brought on Jack Mill and Angus MacDonald, Phil mentioning giving Nicky Devlin a rest, but Jamie McGrath, Nielsen, other players that could have done with a rest of the legs. Would it have been unfair on throwing some of the fringe players in that situation as well?
I don't think they'd have been thankful for it. Anyway.
Well, yeah, that's true.
However, had we decided to just throw on Jack Milne in addition and McDonald's just in addition, this absolute beanpoles to stand in front of the goal and try and prevent any more, then I probably wouldn't have even complained all that much at that point. But I don't think they'd have been thankful for it whatsoever. And also, then when they've had limited sort of game time as well, when Celtic are in their flow like that, they're maybe not the best to deal with it either.
And I guess, obviously the result, Callum, wasn't what we hoped for, what we were maybe expecting, because there was, certain parts of the Aberdeen sport with a little bit of confidence. I think the Parkhead result aided to that. But Celtic, I think we were all aware we're going to come on Saturday with a point to prove, and they did so in devastating fashion. But we've spoken about tiredness not being an excuse, and I think Jimmy Tillene's interview is extremely refreshing to hear. Again, compare and contrast to the way Barry Robson approached the media after the last time we were at Hampden in the League Cup, after the final, about having no divine right to come to Glasgow and play a team like Glasgow Rangers and have a go. Jimmy Tillene came down to Hampden, tried to have a go, got very much dismantled, but spoke very positively in the media about how he's going to learn from this lesson. His players will learn from the lesson. And I think, there didn't, for me, listening to that, I felt upbeat once again and back being excited about the game at the weekend coming up against Dundee, where, maybe after the result like that previously, you'd be like, the game, I'm not really too much looking forward to. But again, a sold out Pittodrie, excitement back to league duty and keeping the pace with Celtic at the top of the table.
Yeah, it definitely was refreshing, the post-match interview. There was no lug howking for a start, as Phil touches his ear in perfect time in there, from Jimmy Tillene. And I think he sort of, that interview and sort of echoing sort of what was on social media about learning from it and moving on and kind of wanting to bounce back. He's not coming in, he's not throwing players under the bus, he's not, as you say, using excuses he mentions. We want to be playing 3 games a week because we want to be in Europe, so we would have to deal with that. And it was positive, and it just made me feel a little bit better about things, to be honest. And hopefully he'll have the same effect on the players, because I'm sure he will. Because it is a vitally important game, the game against Dundee. As I said at the top of the show, it's a chance to still go into the next international break level on points with Celtic. It's a massive opportunity to bounce back, and as you mentioned there, the fact it's already sold out as well. It's appealing kickoff time as well for many. 5:32. And although my dad is not happy about it, I think just that's the old fashioned in him. It's an ideal opportunity to bounce back against Dundee, who, although did come back to win against Kilmarnock at the weekend, only one win away in the league this season, and that was against Motherwell. So hopefully it's an ideal opportunity for the Reds to get back and get the feel-good factor a bit back after that.
Yeah, I think it's so vitally important to get that feel-good factor back. And on the interview, Phil, as well, Colin mentions there that the tiredness, we've spoken about it. I think it's glaringly obvious it was a factor, but Jimmy Tillene not forthcoming and using it as an excuse, again, refreshing to see, because I really liked that answer. Coming out and saying, well, I'm certainly next season he wants us to be having those 3 games a week, so we can't use it as an excuse already when we're a club that are striving to be in a situation that could come tiredness with the European schedule.
Yeah, I think it was nice that he didn't use tiredness as an excuse, and also, didn't try and harp back to previous glories, such as 30 whatever shots against Hacken or whatever it might have been. And I think that is classic Jim, and I think that's where we're really going to sort of see the benefit going forward. How often does he say, we're not thinking about last week, we're not thinking, a game ahead, we're just focused solely on what's in front of us. And I think that's exactly how he's going to approach Saturday. The 6-0, as much as we all want to forget it, will be long forgotten by Jimmy and his staff. And all focus will just go on to Saturday, dust yourself off, back on the horse, and go again. And like we're all hoping, back to the usual programming of winning ways, forget about the Diddy Cup and just focus on the league win, and it's happy days.
Exactly. It's always a Diddy Cup once we go out of it. And it's back to league duties this weekend, Callum. And we've spoken about their appealing kickoff time, sold out Pittodrie. Section R also available to home fans this weekend as well. So a reduced allocation for the Dundee support. Third straight evening kickoff as well. And I think, as I said, the way that our schedule works after we come back from the international break, I think it was Martin Stone I saw on Twitter defined that 4 games after the international break as potentially season defining, given we've got 3 straight away games. It is really crucial just to keep that momentum and feel good factor, particularly around the place, by picking up 3 points this weekend.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it sends us off nicely into the international break as well. And I think it would just make the mood around camp so much better. Because if they go in the back, God forbid we lose another game. I've forgotten what it feels like, to be honest. I think that was part of the shock, maybe at the weekend as well. But if we go in and we drop points again against Dundee, then it's those 2 results sticking out in your head. A big game at home, and the thrashing at Hampden. That going into an international break would be horrible. So it's vitally important to bounce back, and I'm sure the support will be with Jimmy and the boys as well in an evening game. And I think this is just what happens when you are so good. You just you're getting these prime time slots for Jimmy's Showtime Reds.
And I think, Phil, it's probably important as well that it is a home game for us to bounce back in, a big crowd. And as Callum says, that crowd will be fully behind Jimmy and the boys this weekend when the teams come out. And I'm sure we'll see another colourful pre-match display from whatever stand Mez chooses this week. But I'm sure the atmosphere will also be ramped up similar to what it was like against Dundee United. And hopefully the fans can give the lads that extra lift to get those 3 points.
Yeah, definitely. I think it would have, like you say, it'd be a nightmare going in the international break losing. I think the odds are more in our favour. The fact that Pittodrie we're not maybe going elsewhere, so we can try and keep the momentum going. But yeah, like you say, I think the key thing is to come out and just totally forget about the thrashing we took at Hampden, and try and, again, I say this most weeks when it comes to league football, try and get a quick start, because there probably will be small pockets of the crowd that probably will still be lingering on the 6-0, and like Callum says, not used to having this losing feeling, and it might be slight toys out the pram again. So I think it is important to maybe have a quick start, and I think that maybe does come with a little bit of rotation, and changing it up a little bit to try and just really make sure we're fit as we can be, and on the front foot off the bat.
Yeah, and I think it's quite an important point as well, having that fast start. And I think the game this weekend takes on a total different complexion, obviously, given not only ourselves coming into the game off of a heavy defeat, but Dundee themselves coming into the game off a last minute winner at home, where, I follow a few Dundee fans on social media. There was, certain beginnings of murmurings around Tony Docherty's future, given some of their poor recent results. As Callum alludes to, they've only won 1 away game. That was last time out against Motherwell. But that's the only game since we've played them that they haven't conceded two goals in as well. And Callum, I'll go over to you because I know you are the only one that's actually fully prepared for this episode. So has got some starts as well. But Phil mentioned some rotation. I know you want to see some rotation as well.
Yeah, I would love to see Shayden Morris start this game. He's been on fine form off the bench, making impacts left, right, and centre. And what does Shayden Morris do best? Get to the byline and get the ball in the box. Dundee conceded 2 goals at the weekend against Kilmarnock from crosses. John McCracken, questionable goalkeeping at best. I think he struggled for form. I'd be surprised actually if he plays ahead of Trevor Carson.
Well, he dropped everything else, so I'd be surprised if he wasn't dropped himself.
Yeah, absolutely. But Dundee conceded the 4th most goals in the league so far this season. 4th leaguest defence behind St Johnstone, Kilmarnock and St Mirren in that order. On the flip side, though, they've scored the most goals with 17, just behind us and Celtic. So I would love to see Shayden Morris come in and test that defence. And the defence has looked better, I think. Slightly better, I think, since the inclusion of Clark Robertson. I think they're looking slightly sturdier at the back, but susceptible from crosses. Get Shady Mo in there, and he will wreak havoc.
Yeah, it'd be quite an interesting battle watching Shaden Morris come up against Ziad Larkesh. Of course, he was their match winner. Looking at Dens Park Choir, they put out their kind of want for their Dundee starting lineup. Phil, John McCracken, they've continued to have him in goals, but they've gone with a back five. Jordan McGee and Ziad Larkesh, as I mentioned, they're being the fullbacks. Ryan Astley, Antonio Portales, and Clark Robertson as their defensive three. Josh Mulligan and Mo Silla sitting in the midfield, and then a front three, which I'd be quite interested to see if they came to Pittodrie with a front three. Adewumi, Simon Murray, and Seb Palmer Holden. Quite a strong, a tall team as well. Again, I've heard a few people mention that we're not exactly the tallest team in the league, aside from Ruby. So could Dundee look to exploit that with a bit of height in their team? And I think Adewumi, we spoke about from the game at Dens when he came on in the second half, looked to cause us a lot of problems as well.
Yeah, I think they've got that sort of good balance of sort of physicality and pace, especially looking at that front three. It's relatively mobile if that's the way they go, especially looking at Palmer Holden. He's looked quite a good player, but yeah, I'd be surprised if they went for a front three. We'd be less shocked at a back five. Be quite shocked if they go with Dens Park Choir's sort of choice of McCracken in goals. I'm a bit like you. I think Carson would probably get the nod if I was in the dugout, and I think it speaks volumes as well that McCracken's not even been picked for the upcoming Scotland squad. He's been dropped for some bloke from Ipswich I've never heard of till now, probably because I don't think he's played a single minute this season. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting. Like you say, maybe not the tallest team, but I think there is potential height there. Plovara may be coming back. I know there was sort of murmurings about him potentially being fit enough to make the bench for Dundee. If Palaversa was maybe to come in, that's another tall player there. Sockler, as well up front is got height on his side. And if they are going for height, just hopefully bloody mark them this time and don't just let them have a free run towards a header.
I think what's interesting, Callum, is looking at Dundee. They're speaking about a midfield two of Josh Mulligan and Mo Silla. Mo Silla, for me, is extremely impressive. I've always been impressed by him every time I've seen him play against us, and I think he was a huge miss in that second 45 at Dens Park, obviously for medical reasons on that occasion. But Lyle Cameron, an omission from that starting lineup the Dens Park Choir puts out as well. Again, a player that's maybe not hit the heights of the expectations of the Dundee fans, but a good option for them to have off the bench along with Scott Tiffany as well. Pace for them to inject, but the likes of ourselves, we have plenty of pace that we can inject. I just wonder, with kind of the calmness that Mulligan and Silla can bring to that Dundee midfield, could we look to a Palaversa and give Nilsson that break? Phil spoke about already, he's had that Norwegian fixture before coming to Aberdeen. We've seen a couple of slack passes. Look, he's had a great start to his Aberdeen career. He's improved our midfield, there's no doubt about it, but there are a few mistakes creeping in, and unfortunately they're, at the weekend especially, kind of cost us on a couple of occasions. There's nothing wrong with bringing in that £7 million Croatian. And what I really liked, I can't remember where I saw it, I think it was maybe PLZ Soccer. There was folk that actually travelled over from Croatia for the game against Rangers just to watch Ante Palaversa.
Neil, that's quite something, quite a travel to make for Ante Palaversa, but I respect it nonetheless. I would like to see Ante Palaversa coming in this game. I think, we've talked a lot about Nilsson, and it certainly seems to be creeping in a little bit more. It's just slack passes, not looking after the ball quite as well. And it's a concern for me, and we know the quality Palaversa's got. I suppose going into an international break as well, just an extra little bit of rest for Sivert Nilsson could maybe do him the world of good.
It's no disrespect to Dundee as well, resting Nilsson for this game.
No, especially if you're bringing in a man that Man City once paid $7 million for. It's no respect whatsoever. And it's also just probably wanting to see more of Ante Palaversa because, we've come when we signed him, obviously injury record was a bit of a concern, but that seems to be fine so far. But there was a sense of excitement because of a previous price tag that was paid for him. We've maybe not seen as much as we'd liked of him, and that's probably a credit to Stuart Nelson and Graham Shinnie keeping him out of the team for the most part. But this is a game I'd certainly like to see him play and control that midfield with the quality that he has. And Dundee's midfield's a weird one because it seems like they've kind of not worked out quite the right balance.
Yeah.
After Luke McCowan's departure to Celtic, and we mentioned it just about every episode. The game could be won in the midfield, and I'd like to see what Anthony Palaversa can do as well as Graham Shinnie. As well as Shayden Morris. Sorry, the fact we could Palaversa feeding Shayden Morris could cause them problems all day. So I would like to see that absolutely.
Before I go to Phil, who are you bringing Shayden Morris in for?
Well, following the weekend, it could be either of the wingers, I think, out of Duke and Keskinen. For me, Keskinen a little bit frustrating at times at the weekend, just sort of running into trouble a lot of the time. And then when he got brought up at halftime, was against Dundee United, when you thought, maybe it's a knock, and I just thought he just kept running into trouble. I think I'd like to see it for that, and it keeps Duke out on the left, but at the same time, it's fine. It's a fine problem to have because whether it's Duke or Keskinen, that means then they can come off the bench and have an impact with a point to prove. So either way, I'm not all that fussed. And I think maybe with Jordan McGee, if he was to start on the right, then maybe Duke's physicality up against him would be quite an interesting battle. So I'm leaning towards Keskinen.
Yeah, and I only asked you that because I was going to come to Phil and ask if, based on what we saw at the weekend with both wingers being hauled off at half-time for, potentially not following the manager's instructions in terms of their defensive duties, could it be both wingers are changed this weekend, obviously potentially opening the door for Vinny Bizaouin to potentially start a game, which I know Callum would be extremely excited about, or something else we've spoken on this episode, this podcast before, about Jamie McGrath going back out to the left-hand side and then Leighton Clarkson coming into the 10, which might help Esther Sokler as well, because we know what Leighton Clarkson can do in the 10 as well. Is that a possibility this weekend, Phil?
I think it's more than a possibility, yeah. I'm at the moment probably leaning a bit more towards McGrath going back out on the wing, but like I said earlier, I think he could probably do with a rest as well. So I, for one, much like Callum, would absolutely love to see Vinny coming in. And to be fair, I think his performances off the bench have actually been, pretty passable for the most part. He's gotten his foot on the ball. He's nearly scored a screamer against Dundee United. He's shown himself to be a lot more. Well, not a lot more. He's just sort of proven to everybody that he's not got this stinking attitude, in my opinion.
But is he maybe just more suited to being an impact sub just now?
I think at the moment, yeah, I think it'd be hard, especially as poor as McGrath's maybe been at points recently, and as sort of tired as he is looking. I think he is a player that just wants to play every week, and he does have that quality in him where it is really hard to justify taking him out of the squad entirely. So I mean, like you said, I think I'd probably be more inclined to have McGrath back out left and having Clarkson in the 10. I think this is the sort of game where, again, no disrespect to Dundee, it's a game that could kind of get him that little bit of confidence back. He'll have that little bit more time on the ball potentially, especially if Dundee do end up going with that 2 in the middle. I think he'll definitely have a lot more time to get his foot on the ball and try and pick out the passes out wide. So I think it'll be interesting to see. Again, I think this is the interesting thing about Saturday is it's all about how Jimmy reacts and what he takes from the game, and I think that's I think what everybody will be looking to come. Well, what time will the lineup come out at? Like 4:15 maybe. So yeah, see, quick maths, Callum. Bet you like that one. But yeah, I think that'll be the most interesting thing to see how he responds.
On the flip side, does he perhaps go with the same starting 11 that started against Celtic and say, this is your chance to go and prove yourself to bounce back after that?
Oh, well, it took the words kind of right out of my mouth, Callum. And I did wonder that, but I just can't help but feel, I know we will have a week to recover. I think we have to see a couple of changes, in my opinion anyway. And I think, tiredness is certainly playing an issue, but you'd like to think with a week, we're only in November, they should be fully recovered by then. Jimmy Tilleen's not a manager, though, that makes wholesale changes. It feels like, so, we can sit here till the cows come home and discuss 2 or 3 changes. I think we'll only see 2 tops. I think one of the wingers will retain their place. Actually, probably the midfield will retain their place as well. But I get your logic there, Callum. It is a perfect opportunity, and I guess my other kind of point on that was going to be: is it, with the fact we lost the game in the manner that we did, and we're speaking about getting the confidence back, and getting the result to keep the momentum going in the league, is making too many changes going to be too many, or do you stick with that same starting lineup? I'll go to you first on that, Callum.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think after a result like that, and then if you get dropped the next week, that's a potential. Footballers with fragile egos, it could be a problem, and I think Jimmy Dillon's sort of big on trusting his team, and then they spoke about that sort of dichotomy of trusting them to decide when to play out from the back, things like that. He might just go, I trust you guys to bounce back from this and go and show us what you can do, and they'll have that point to prove as well after such a drubbing, where just nothing came off and everything seemed to go wrong. So I wouldn't be surprised for things to stay the same. I wouldn't necessarily be against it. If I was to pick one change, I would love to see Shayden Morris start.
So if you take anything from this episode, Callum wants to see Shayden Morris start. But I suppose, Phil, that the point I guess I'm trying to make is, if, Jimmy goes and makes 3 changes, let's say, for the game this weekend, and we don't go on to win the game, then the focus comes on him, doesn't it? And it's just that, I guess, the fickle nature of football.
Yeah, and it is. It's a tough line to draw. I think, Jimmy wouldn't really mind that. I think he's the type of manager that would want to try and, take the brunt of the responsibility for something going wrong, and not have that fall on his players. So I don't think that would actually faze him too much. But, where Callum was sort of saying about fragile egos of players getting dropped, I think this is a completely different nature of squad. I don't think anyone would probably take it personally. But on the flip side of that, you've got players who are coming off the bench and making that impact, whether it's Morris, whether it's Palaversa, Peter Ambrose, maybe, potentially, who knows. But, you've got players that are coming off the bench and making that impact, and then they're on the bench the next week, and they're probably sitting there going, when's my opportunity going to come? It will come eventually, but it's just sort of, you can't just keep fobbing them off and then expecting them to be okay with it, as much as I think they probably are. But Shayden Morris, especially, in my opinion, has earned the right to start on the wing on Saturday. I think he's shown himself to have the correct attitude out of the game. I think he's improved drastically since we first saw him, and he's been producing the creativity that we've needed out wide.
Yeah, and certainly from the second half that I endured at Hampden, he showed more attacking intent in the first 50 seconds of the second half than we did for most of the first 45. But I think, it's just really important that we bounce back this weekend. And I think, as much as we debate whether or not we make 3 changes, 1 change, no change, whatever that lineup that is announced at 4:15 on Saturday, everyone will be fully entrusting of what Jimmy Tilleen has put out, and most importantly, fully behind Jimmy and that starting 11. And as we've discussed, those subs being ready off the bench as well. And I think what's also refreshing to see is the players know when given a chance, they have to be ready to grasp it, as you said, Phil, and know then the possibilities. If they do start showing their potential off the bench, it could lead to starts as well. But let's just hope that when we reconvene after the Dundee game ahead of the international break, we're back on track, 3 points in the bag, and things looking red and rosy once again. So thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much, Callum, for joining me on this episode. And thank you very much to everyone, whether it's been of an Aberdeen, Celtic or Dundee persuasion that's listened in or watched to this episode as well. And if you stuck with us to the very end, you've earned your top RTG badge. Well done. We'll see you next time.